Well, I want to say good evening to everybody who's joining us right here on World Jam Global Radio. A slight difference tonight on the issues today. We will not be starting with any music. I'm going to go straight into the show. We've got our special guest tonight, Tony Sayers, who can only be with us for the first hour. And so therefore, we're going to try and get as much into that first hour as we possibly can. And as you're well aware, the theme tonight is Refugee and Terrorism 2015. And once again, riding along with me, shotgun, is my co-host and my co-writer. Here he is, Dr. David Rumey. Good evening, David.
Hello, Kervin. How are you in London today?
Well, it's very cold. We've been warned that we're going to have minus 11 degrees tonight. It's going to be the coldest night in November for years.
Wow. In the morning, you'll have a lot of fog on the River Thames. It'll look very, very romantic. You need a Turner and some Mannerists there to paint something lovely for you.
Yeah, we will do that. But how are you and how is America?
Well, America is very sick. Very sick. In fact, it's on its last legs of freedom. And I'm very happy to have Tony with us here today because he speaks a great deal about natural law. And one of the basic documents, probably the second most important basic document of the United States, the first being our Constitution, from 1787, is the 1776 Declaration of Independence, in which Thomas Jefferson writes about natural law. Natural law meaning, in that context, that no one has the right to rule another without that person's approval and will. And we opposed George III ruling us because we had taxation without representation. We had soldiers being quartered in our homes. We had rules and regulations on our trade that prohibited the growth of the colonies at the expense of the people here who were born, as opposed to being imported from Great Britain to rule over us. And that natural law led to the revolution led by George Washington and Lafayette and Pulaski and Steuben and Howe and Gates and many other great Americans and European Americans who fought in our behalf, and that eventually led to Paris. Now we're at a point where, once again, we are in a position where natural rights, and I'm glad Tony is here, are being challenged in favor of the rights of the 1% and the oligarchy who use the police forces and use military forces and militia and empower certain groups over others who have guns. If a black man in America walked down the street carrying guns like white people do in Texas and Oklahoma, there'd be a mass revolt and lynchings all over the place against blacks. So all this is going on, and on top of it now, we have a situation where Americans somehow believe, after George Bush, that we are the police of the world. This extends itself from the Wilsonian idea in World War I that we entered to make the world safe for democracy. In fact, we did not enter that war to make the world safe for democracy. We entered that war because the Russians had a revolution and surrendered to Germany under Lenin. The French were in full mutiny in February of 1917, on the verge of losing the war, and the British couldn't maintain a foothold in Europe to fight Germany if France surrendered and Belgium collapsed. Therefore, Wilson, on April 3rd, asked Congress to declare war on Germany because of the Lusitania. That was in 1917. Now, the Lusitania was sunk in 1915. That would be like we went to Afghanistan 2.5 years after the World Trade Center of September 11. It would be a joke. Wilson went into the war to ensure that Britain and France would win so that they could repay the billions and billions in loans they had taken out from American bankers in violation of American neutrality. And that is the only reason why we went into that war and suffered the horrendous losses in humankind that we suffered in our own country. And had that war been settled by Europe as it was begun by Europe, Hitler would have never risen because Germany would have won the war, as it did in 1871 and 72 in the Franco-Prussian War, and they would have settled up, and Hitler would have never come to power. The Kaiser would have been there, and there would have been no Holocaust. So now America is playing Wilson and George W. Bush, and we're going to make the world safe from terrorism. And in fact, every effort, every step, every bullet we fire, every plane we fly is making the world less safe, but making the arms producers and the bankers far more wealthy. So that's how I see America today. And with that, I'll let you introduce our very excellent guest and a very humane person, ex-estate agent Tony Sayers.
Good evening, Tony, and once again, thank you for joining us. You've been with us before, but it's great to have you again, and unfortunately we're only going to have you for the first hour. But just tell our listeners just a little bit about yourself, about what you do, and then tell them why you're here and what we're going to talk about tonight.
Hi, thanks for having me back. Hi, David. Yeah, basically,
Hello,
I came to be aware of some information. Well, about 5 years ago, I was very frustrated in the work that I was doing, the job. Very, very frustrated with life, working lots of hours. I started asking like the big questions in life, like why are we here, and why is it such a struggle, and everything like that. And I kind of got the answers revealed to me. And as I was researching further and further, I found sort of quite a dark agenda going on, and I realised that actually the world is in quite a lot of trouble. And the deeper I looked, the further I went into it, the more I realised that I, having come upon that information, had a responsibility as a citizen of this planet to bring this information to other people's awareness. And really, since then, I've been sort of non-stop raising awareness on a multitude of different topics to do with where we're heading at the moment. We're in absolutely, I would say, vital times as a species at the moment, where we are on a tightrope of it either gets a lot worse and we become more enslaved, and we see this world war which is on the brink come into manifestation, or we start standing up as a populace of people and start uniting together, putting down the labels of race, sexuality, all these things that are put there to divide and rule us. We need to put that down and come together. And as you say, David, these people, they're just the 1%. We have the numbers, and we have to try and come together and as a unit and stop this in its tracks, because we have a responsibility to future generations, to our children and grandchildren, not to let this happen.
Tony, let me ask you this. You said in a YouTube, an excellent YouTube, and I want to say that I somewhat envy you, because your presentation is so gentle and vulnerable and kind that I wish I was more like you. When I give public speeches, I enter like Genghis Khan and lecture, but that's from being a professor. And you're very understanding, and you take questions from people who ask you if you think a tomato has feelings like a cow, and you take them very seriously. And I would just look at them and say, let's move on, Now, let me ask you this. You say that the police and the military do not think morally. Now, for you, immoral is a violation of the natural law. You say they follow orders without questioning orders are those who give them. And you say they make it worse for us, and they allow the people who rule us and give the orders to keep their hands clean. They wash their hands in the proverbial Pontius Pilate fashion, while the schmucks have to do the dirty work and bear the burden of guilt that karma shall return to them. How do you think we can change this thought process and immorality among the police and the military if we cannot gain access to their Ausbildung, that's the German word, to their education process? How can we change them if the elite will not let us have access to the education that trains them to be the schmucks that they are?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's a very difficult one to answer, because these people, the military and the police, they are sectored off from society. They live in their own their own families, and this is why a lot of them join these institutions, because psychologically they've come, a lot of them, from broken homes, from parental issues, from abandonment, and they're looking for a new family. So they join the army, not all of them, but they join the army and the police force, and suddenly they've got a new family where they're completely separated from the rest of society, where the brainwashing is so intense, and we see how these people like shouting in their faces, repeating stuff in their faces. So they are amongst the most brainwashed people on the planet, and it's absolutely so important that we reach these people. And it's going to take guts, and it's going to take real action, and it's going to take people who have people within these institutions basically getting in their faces and saying, look, what you're doing is wrong. You are enslaving, or you're helping to enslave your own children and grandchildren. And we need to be brave enough to actually do that. And if it means, falling out with family members, friends, people don't want to hear it. But unless we get to these people, there's going to be an absolute bloodbath on this planet, because you've got the police, which are getting more and more, especially where you are, David, in the States, more and more militarized every day. They're walking around with tasers and guns, and they're more or less the army now. And it's getting more and more serious, because they're getting asked to turn more and more on their own people, which is another reason why you guys need to keep your guns. Because if your government turns on you, then that's it, basically. So we need to really get to these people. I mean, I personally, I had a really interesting. It was really synchronistic, because a couple of weeks ago I was really banging on about how we need to get through to the military and the police, and certain situations were cropping up where So, for example, I was walking in my local town, and the army were having a recruitment day right in the middle of the town. This was the week it was all going on. I thought, right, I need to go and get in their faces, and so I went round to 3 or 4 of them individually, and I started talking to them, and they would say anything to justify it. Things like, well, there's always been war. It's we don't have a say in the political side. We just and it's a question at that point of saying, well, yeah, because you're just following orders. These people that are giving out the orders, these are warmongering people with dark agendas that are going in to poor countries that have no weaponry, or very little at most. You're talking fireworks, dropping bombs from the sky like cowards, and causing absolute havoc. And it's actually saying it like to them, and being that upfront with these people, and saying, do you realise that the orders that you're taking are from people with a very dark agenda? And if they say things, well, we don't get involved with politics, then, well, you should be getting involved with politics, because you can't just go around doing it. Well, we've always had war. Well, yeah, the reason we've always had war is because you won't put your guns down. And it's as simple as that. It's getting in these people's faces. There needs to be people turning up at these events where the military are trying to recruit. We need to start turning up at these events and giving flyers out, getting in people's faces. Nothing is going to change by just sitting there doing nothing. It's going to take real hard work, and there are people within those institutions starting to wake up now. They are starting to smell the coffee. So we need to help that along, and take the opportunity wherever possible to be brave and look these people in the eye and tell them, you're being brainwashed. You're going to these countries, you're not going there for the reasons you think you're going there. The US government, the UK government, Western governments, they're funding, they're training the likes of ISIS, Al Qaeda, mujahideen. You know, ask yourself the question: why are our governments funding these organisations? And being as upfront as possible with it, and that's what we need to do. But I said in that video, if anyone's got any ideas on how we can reach them further, then let me know, because unless we get to these people that are holding the tyranny together. These people are the glue for the politicians and the powers that shouldn't be. These people are the glue holding it all together. So if we can get to these people...
Yes, but how are we going to get to them? As you say very clearly, they're segregated in their own neighborhoods. They wear their own uniforms. They get their own medals. They have their own dinners, their own unions. All their wives are in collective units together, stick together, brainwashed together. How do we open that door to show them there's a higher good and there's an allegiance that is higher that they're called to than the ones given by their orders, their order givers?
Sure. Well,
how do we get to them? Really? How? Well, you know, public education in America public education here means public, not private like in England. The public education system here has been completely segregated into black and white in most communities now because of geography. People are not educated the same. Neighborhoods have become very stratified by wealth. You're never going to meet a rich person in America anymore unless you're serving them a croissant or a bagel. It's just not going to happen. So how do we get to these low-level, medium intelligence people who are the robots of the ruling classes? How do we get to them? And not abstractly, I mean pragmatically.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know you guys have it as much as myself and Kervin will overhear the absolute hype of war and the patriotism which is sold to us. You know, we buy into it so much. You know, this whole idea of support the troops it's within our DNA almost. And if someone comes out and says, well, no, actually we shouldn't be supporting the troops, they're looked upon as a crazy person. But that is the kind of bravery that it's gonna have to take. It's gonna have to take people actually not supporting the troops, but actually absolutely deploring the troops, deploring the military police, and it's going to take parents, you know, wives. Oh, you want to do that for a career? Well, you know, I don't want to know you if that's what you're going to do for the career. It's a complete change of mindset, which is not going to happen overnight. But the more and more people that are becoming aware that, you know, actually, we've had enough of war now. There are more people that are saying, look, this whole idea of supporting the troops is completely wrong, and there is a growing movement which is getting to the police and the military. But again, we need to get to them more directly, as you say, and that's something that I'm still trying to figure out how we can do.
Hang on. Let me just drop in here a minute. Tony, you know, you're talking about the state of mind of the individuals that now are recruited into the army and places like that. But surely those that are being recruited, even though they're longing to belong to a family from whatever brokenness that they come from, they still have an opinion, they still have a mindset, they still have an understanding of what goes on around in the world around them. At what point are they stripped of their knowledge, their integrity, their dignity, their beliefs, their upbringing, their knowledge and everything else, and start becoming robotic? At what point do they start becoming like that?
Well, I mean, it's a diseased mindset from the start, because, you know, when we've seen the propaganda this week, when you're given the official version of everything, the official version of what's on the news, that is the only thing that you're going to go by. So in their minds, their mindset is completely okay. So they don't think there's anything wrong at all. So it's trying to get into their heads. But I think what is happening at the moment is that things have got so hectic and so, well, bad that people are starting to ask questions now, and they are starting to look at who are the real terrorists, and they're asking, why is this going on? That doesn't make sense. And there's a lot of unanswered questions where, this 1%, this ruling class are starting to make mistakes, and a lot of people are questioning what the real agenda is here, and that goes videos coming out now where soldiers are throwing away their medals, they're speaking out. I met one at a meeting in London the other day, and he is saying to me, Tony, I've been in that. There are military they're starting to ask questions. They are waking up. So it's not all doom and gloom. This is starting to happen. We just need to take every opportunity that we can to sort of help that along. But by no means is it going to be a quick fix. But we need to get to them because we're on the cusp of absolute chaos, unfortunately.
While we've got you, Tony, and I'm fully aware that we've only got an hour with you, and there's going to be a lot that we're going to try and get out of you, and I'm sure
I might be able to do a little bit longer, Kervin.
Okay, well that would be absolutely pleasurable. But yeah. Listen, can we ask you what your thoughts are on the France terrorism event and the refugee issues that are resulting from that event, especially based on what's taken place over the last week?
Well, for me, it's classic Hegelian dialectic, which basically a lot of researchers have coined problem, reaction, solution. They've wanted this war in Syria for a number of years, and they... Sorry?
I said spot on. I was having that conversation this morning in the sauna in the steam room.
Yeah, they've wanted it for years. It's part of a larger agenda whereby they want to manipulate a World War III. Now, you look at the countries that are involved here. You've got Russia, China on the verge, France, America, Britain looking to get into it. This has been written down for years that they've been wanting this world war, and they're doing everything to get it. And what they do is they cause a problem. So, for example, in this case, the France bombings. Now, whether that was done as some sort of false flag, or whether or not the funded ISIS group actually did it, they either let it happen or it's happened in a false way. So they've caused the problem to get the public reaction, which is, oh my God, we need to do something. What can we do to stop this? Absolutely. And then they provide the solution, which was already planned at the start. Well, we need to go and send in ground troops into Syria. We need to bomb Syria. So the solution is, that's how they get the public on side. That's how they get the military, the police, all on side by this mind control technique of the Hegelian dialectic. And it was the same with 9/11, with the towers, whereby they wanted to go into Iraq. They caused this massive chaotic event, and so they can have a war on terror which will never end, because you can't put an end on that. When will terror ever end? What's next? War on horror? I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And war is money, as we know. There's a lot of money to be made there. These countries, why is it always in the Middle East? They're resource rich, they're oil rich. These boogeymen, there's one after the other: Hussein, Bin Laden, now Assad. There's always a boogeyman that we have to go and bomb the hell out of another country for. And time again this has happened, and people are starting to question it now, and it's all part of these suicide bombers. I mean, they're always there with the passport, aren't they? Every single...
The most funniest thing for me this week was that these masterminds who had put together this plan to create absolute havoc in Paris strapped themselves with suicide bombs, right, to go and create that havoc and then kill themselves, right, but accidentally, on purpose, left their passport and ID cards in the car. But these are masterminds, right, because that's what they've been referred to. Ooh. Are you both there? Oh, have I lost the call? We've dropped the call. Stay with me, guys. We are coming straight back.
Hello.
Yep. Are you guys there?
Yeah,
I'm here.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. The line got dropped just then. I don't know whether there's a boogeyman on the line and they don't want us to have this conversation.
Well, probably.
But yeah, we were talking about these the guys that actually who prepared themselves for this absolute havoc and terror, but accidentally on purpose left these passports and ID cards so that they could. And the one thought that crossed my mind, irrespective of whether or not they wanted it to be identified as an ISIS issue, surely they would have known by leaving behind the ID. It also ties up to their families, friends, and relatives who could also receive consequences from their actions, which they probably wouldn't want. Not even a petty thief would operate in this absolutely stupid way. And yet they've now sold war, because I'm glad you used the word sold earlier on. They've now sold war to the people of France who weren't believing in a war in the Middle East in the first place.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you look at historically these bombings. There's always, as you say, a passport or an ID card that's left there. I mean, you take 9/11. 9/11 was the only plane crash in the history of plane crashes where they couldn't find the black box. Yet they managed to find the bomber's passport completely intact, ironically with the name Mohammed. And it's the same thing over and over again. There's always a passport, like a Muslim passport or an Islamic passport there. I mean, these passports must be made out of like steel or something. You know, so there's so many holes in the fact that all these people died and there was no footage on anyone's. You know what it's like now. There's so much footage straight away from people's mobiles and things like that. There was no real footage at all, and you know, it's just apparently the guy shouted some you know, God save Allah thing. You know, it's just all like stirring up the pot, getting people to hate Muslims even more. They want humanity divided in so many ways. So we're all blaming each other, and yet the real problem, sitting in Parliament and beyond, are just sitting there laughing at us while we're pointing the fingers at each other. We're now in Europe. There's a lot of people that are blaming immigrants. There's a lot of hatred towards immigrants, when actually these immigrants are just escaping from a situation that we're actually going in and bombing and destroying their homes.
You know, and again, refugees are people that actually arrive into foreign countries with no ID, no possessions, because they're fleeing terror, or they're fleeing poverty. But all of these guys, and there was also this report of these two guys who actually sold their local business. Who were involved in the planning of this, but they sold their business just days or hours before the attacks. But yet they're all being classed as refugees. How can you standardize these people as refugees when they have been situated in these places that they're committing their atrocities for some time? The mastermind turns out to be Moroccan. 3 of them turn out to be French nationalists, and the others were living in Brussels in Belgium. That doesn't seem to be a band of refugees to me.
No, I mean, who knows what to believe when it comes to the official line. You know, I don't listen to anything that mainstream media says in terms of what really happened. All I know is that it just, for me, they want to go to war. They've wanted to get into Syria for ages. They need public support. Because people are now starting to become sick of all these wars, and they know they needed to do something drastic to get people on side. And you know, abracadabra, we have this war, and you know, Facebook goes crazy where you can change your profile picture with the French flag. You know, let's just forget the fact that last summer Israel killed 2,700 Palestinians, and there was no option to change your profile picture to a Palestinian flag, was there?
Absolutely.
You know, it's so selective. There was a number of people died in Mali last night. Where's the option to change your flag to a Mali flag?
Nigeria and Kenya last week.
Absolutely. I mean, the amount of countries that are actually going through all this at the moment, but you know, it's all selective. And the masses, unfortunately, because they can't think for themselves, or they're not. They just want to bury their head in the sand. You know, they will be told who to fill. When file picture with the French flag, all that does is it supports the whole bombing campaign. You know, it's just, people need to realise that if they're going to do things like, just think. You know, think about things. Before, if something like this happens, just take a step back and think, well, does it add up? Who's benefiting from it? Who's benefiting if we go into bomb Syria? And there are more and more people starting to question things, but on the whole, the masses, the apathetic masses that just want to, you know, watch football on a Saturday afternoon and then X Factor, you know, these are the people we need to get to, because everyone at the moment is needed to, once they realise there's a problem, they need to speak up, speak out, and that's the only way that tyranny won't be able to hide. If we shine enough light on the darkness, then there's no hiding place for it. And everyone, if people are aware of this information, they need to be active. And sitting on information like this is not the time to do.
Let me ask you this, Tony, as David. This idea of the order followers that you speak of so well and so uniquely, in my view, is quite interesting to me, because I'm Jewish, and I've been to Auschwitz and Buchenwald, Oranienburg, Dachau, Treblinka, Majdanek. I've been to all of these places, and I can't tell you how I feel when I go there. It's a sense of overwhelming loss and frustration and a sense of emptiness. The idea of 6 million souls surrounding me and saying, what are you doing? What did you say? Why are you silent? Why don't you become provocative? And it's very hard to do this because, as you've spoken about, you lost a relationship with a cousin who was a military person because you were so outspoken, I guess. Now, last night I saw a movie, and I encourage everyone to see this movie. It's called Gray Zone. Gray Zone. And it's the life of Jews in Auschwitz-Birkenau who are forced for 120 days to put bodies into the gas showers, then drag them out dead, pull the teeth for gold, cut the hair for hair, and then cremate them, shovel their ashes and dump them into the river. Now, or to send them to Manovish, which is Auschwitz III, where they were used for chemical reasons to make fertilizer, soap, etc. So, having seen this, these capos, these Jews who are forced to do this work, serve for 120 days, and then they're rotated. Rotated means they're killed, because the Nazis didn't want any witnesses to what these people were doing. And these Jews were aware that their work made possible the horrendous crime of the Holocaust. They were aware of it. They were conscious of it. But their desire to survive went beyond any concept of their willingness to die. Out of 13 Sonderkommandos, they're called special commands, only one, number 12 of the 13, ever rebelled against their Nazi overlords and made possible the 1.5 million who were cremated at Auschwitz in large measure. Now, as a Jew, if I said that in Israel, I would be assassinated. If I said that in America publicly, as I'm doing now, most people would call me, a Jew, an anti-Semite. But this is history. And by the way, the movie Gray Zone was made by Jews. And the whole thing was funded by Harvey Keitel, an American Jew. And he was pointing out the extremes to which humanity will go in the most atrocious circumstances to survive. Now, I can understand that kind of behavior if your life is on the line. But how do we explain the behavior of voluntary military? We have no draft in the United States. How do you explain voluntary, well-educated, West Point, Harvard, Yale, Illinois, California, Texas A&M, well-educated young men who are officers and enlisted men joining of their own free will and being compensated for these mass murders, estimated maybe up to 1 million people we have killed since September 11th. 1 million people we have killed. How do you explain their willingness? Then how do you explain the willingness of people who go to church every Sunday and have children and wives who become policemen, shoot people who are unarmed, or because they're black or Hispanic, or because, oh, I'm afraid of my life, and then plant weapons on them? How do you explain this kind of human conduct? The first, in Auschwitz, we can understand. It's your life versus somebody's life. You don't know. But in this case, it's far different. In that case, it was an absolute forced slavery and hell upon those people. In this case, it's a willing voluntariness, and they use the money to enrich themselves and to make a life on the corpses of others. How do you get that into the brains of those who are guilty?
Yeah, I mean, humanity is littered with events and wars throughout the ages where people have caused so much distress, injuries, murder to each other. And I think we're at a point of history now where we are being nudged to evolve. I think, although I think with great change, with anything good change, preceding that there is chaos. With anything good before, there is struggle, and this is where I see that we are at the moment. I think this is. I'm hoping if enough people stand up, I don't think it's a given, but I think if enough people stand up, if enough people speak out over and over again, and then they raise their children and they raise their children to say war is wrong, it's not good to join these organisations. You know, if you want to join that organisation, I don't want to know you anymore. You know, that I think that we're at a point in history where if we don't evolve, then I don't know what our future is going to be, because I think when you look at it, when you actually stand back and look at what we're doing to each other, you know, we're one human family, we're all connected, and we've been played off in a game of chess against each other by this tiny 1% that are pulling the strings, and they've brainwashed us to such an extent, using their media and from cradle to grave. I mean, for example, I went out into town the other day, and I went to buy my nephew a birthday present, and I looked in this Kervin will know the Argos catalogue. Argos, yeah. So I looked in the Argos catalogue, and it's like a catalogue with selection of toys, and in all the pages, all it was toy guns, you know, water pistols, you know. Then you go into the computer games, and they're war games, and it's like, God, no wonder when you consider that a child's from the years 1 to 8, it's like everything. It's like a sponge. It just the child takes guns, all the subliminals, and no wonder that people grow up normalising war and destruction, because that's all they've known since a child. So it's so much. And it starts with I guess educating the young people and trying to overcome the propaganda, because they want war. These people, that the average person doesn't want a war. If you went into your local bar and you asked everyone in that bar, right, who wants a war, no one's going to say, well, yeah, I do. So the question has to be asked, well, why do we have them?
Yeah.
And the reason we have them is because ruling class of people that they don't think the same as the rest of us. They don't have that empathy that the average.
They don't even live in our world.
No, well, there's arguments for that, but they don't have the empathy that your average human being will have, and that's why we have them. And they love all this. They love all this war, and that's why it's propagated on us from cradle to grave.
Let's take the double standard too, because we have to. You know, I'm I'm a humanist, but I have a great belief in behavioral psychology ever since I learned of the salivating Pavlovian dog and B.F. Skinner. I do believe people are conditioned both actively, passively, consciously, and subliminally in our society. Certainly, black people in America are conditioned not to vote. Why? Because black people frequently don't take things such as traffic tickets as seriously as a well-paid white person. Because, for example, me, if I get a traffic ticket, I take it into my office, give it to the secretary, she pays it out of my account, and it's done. I don't ever think of it again. A black person may not want to go to the police station or the courthouse to pay it, doesn't have a checking account, it passes, and guess what? For a $15 traffic ticket, suddenly he has a warrant on his head to be arrested.
Absolutely.
So he goes to vote, and when he goes to vote, the police are sitting out there because the police don't like black people voting. They work for the establishment. So they go up to the man, and they say, are you going to vote? He says, yes. He says, show me your ID. Well, we have ID laws for that very reason now. It used to be you didn't need an ID to vote in America. You just had to be on the poll. You had to be registered. And you say, my name is so-and-so, I live so-and-so, and you voted. And by the way, it's still that way if you're a white person. I can go to my poll. They all know me. Oh, hello, David. You're back to vote. Yeah, I am. Oh, here. Oh, I don't need to see your ID. I know you. You get it? But a black person has to show an ID. So the police make him show the ID. Then they run to their car. They put it through the computer, which is the most effective means of controlling the people nowadays. And they put it in the computer. And they say, oh, arrest warrant, 2007. Arrest him. They go in, arrest him. The whole neighborhood finds out that John Smith went to vote. John Smith got arrested for an outlying warrant. Now, who's going to go vote? You've just suppressed the vote because everyone's thinking, my God, do I have a warrant out? I'm afraid if I call to see, they might find out where I am and come and arrest me. So they keep their heads low, they hide, they're disenfranchised, and democracy supposedly works. No, it doesn't. Now, the second thing I want to say is, and I'd like you to address this, the second method of conditioning people is the double standard. For example, I can say to kill 2,700 Palestinians in a war of your choice based upon a lie that you knew was a lie. You knew exactly those 3 Israelis were dead. Those boys were dead. You knew it within 24 hours, and you let the parents go on for 30 days and fly to Geneva and pretend like they weren't dead so you could build up the steam, the hate, the vitriol to justify a war against Gaza. But when Meir Kahane's grandson and 2 boys, sons of rabbis, go and kidnap a 16-year-old Palestinian boy who looks gay, and they burn him to death in a car by forcing him to drink gasoline, nothing is said. And who arrests the boy? Who arrests Meir Kahane and his allies? I'll tell you who. The Israeli police arrest him. Well, why don't we have the Palestinian police arrest the man? He committed the crime in Palestine. He committed the crime against the Palestinian. Why are the Israeli police arresting him, laughing when they arrest him, take him to a hospital, and 6 months later say his mental illness is cured and let him go back on the street? This is the injustice. Now, in America, if I said that, I would be called an anti-Semite. Even though I'm a Jew, I am using sympathy for Palestine and my desire to hold the Zionists in Israel. I don't say Jews because as a Jew, I am very different from a Zionist. Yeah. I want to hold the Zionist government responsible, as does Noam Chomsky, as does Norm Finkelstein, as does this wonderful man, Uri Arevni in Israel, who These people want to hold the government responsible. But if we say this, Tony, we are anti-Semites hiding behind our desire for justice for people who don't deserve to live, and according to the Justice Minister of Israel, should be killed in childhood because they're nothing better than snakes. But, are you there? Now, endure me a moment. This is in today's newspaper from Charles Krauthammer, a Jewish American who writes for the Washington Post. Listen to this. Obama's priorities lie elsewhere. For example, climate change, which he considers the greatest threat to our future. And of course, closing Guantanamo. Obama actually released 5 detainees on the day after the Paris massacre. He is passionate about Guantanamo. It is a great terrorist recruiting tool, he reportedly explains. Obama still seems to believe that even as the Islamic State has produced an astonishing wave of terrorist recruitment with a campaign of brutality, butchery, and slavery filmed in living color, he defends Islam. Who can still believe that young Muslims are leaving Europe to join the Islamic State because of Guantanamo? Obama can never bring himself to acknowledge why these people kill and willingly die. Obama is committed to radical Islamism. He is not committed to our protection and defense. He is afraid to go to war against the enemies of America and Europe. Now, if he used those same words against a Jew, he would be called an anti-Semite. But because he uses them against a black president, he is not called a racist. In fact, he's paid $1 million a year to spout that kind of venom. And I will remind the people who don't know and inform the people who never knew that this man was one of the biggest single venomous mouths advocating for the war against Iraq in March 19 of 2003. For 1 year, he beat the drums for war. And he justified the war, he called for the war, and he was wrong about every single fact he supported the war with. Now, how is it that we, who are Jews, are called anti-Semites because we demand Judaism live up to its historical standard and not to the political economic experiment of Zionism from Theodor Herzl and Chaim Weizmann, but this man is not called a racist when he takes on a man who is a black president, and if he was a Republican white president, he would be praising him to the heavens and putting his head on Mount Rushmore. Explain that to me, those two conditioning responses in our world, the reward and punishment of these two situations.
Well, I mean, I would say that Obama is part of the, he's a puppet for the Zionists that are controlling and pulling the strings in the background. So, of course, he's going to be very defensive. I mean, it's a very strong mind control technique how they've pushed this. I mean, about 5-10 years ago, this phrase anti-Semitism, you would have hardly have heard of it, but now it's it's been spoken about more and more in mainstream media that you're an anti-Semite if you say this, you're an anti, and that's because the Zionists are the agenda is coming to the surface, and people are actually questioning them now. And because people are questioning them now, they're laying it on thick and pulling the emotional strings on people. Well, you can't say that because that's anti-Semitism. Can't even say it myself. So they've got into this psyche. They've got into people's minds that if you speak out about what's going on over there, well, you're just an anti-Semite. So you can't question anything now. And it's very clever what they do. They use their media, their controlled media, to direct the way they want society to think and how they want it to act. Because all media is controlled by 5 companies anyway. So you don't really, there's no choice. You just get the official version of everything. And they've used the media to propagate this idea of anti-Semitism and to get, I don't know what the word, but to get people on, to get people to stop speaking out against Zionism. So I would say Obama is very defensive of that ideology.
Let me just come in here for a minute, guys. Are you there, David?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, David, I want you to hear this clearly. And Tony, you may well remember this. I don't want to give away your age or anything. I'm about 54, but I want to give you a scenario, a real life scenario about how propaganda works, right? And how it turns race against race, right? And this is a real story. Now, a few years ago, the biggest newspaper that we had in this country, they're not about anymore, but was the News of the World. Everybody called it a rag. But the News of the World was so powerful, it actually controlled the trend of people's thinking nationwide in this country. Correct, Tony?
Yeah.
Okay. So back in the 80s, right, there was a reggae singer by the name of Rankin Dread who got to #1 in the pop charts with a reggae track called Fatty Bum Bum. I don't know, do you remember that, Tony?
I've heard of it, but I couldn't sing it back to you.
Let me give you the story. Rankin Dread was a dissident. He was from Jamaica, but he had a very, very bad past, and he had killed 1 or 2 people, as they do in Jamaica, through fighting and with guns. And he left Jamaica as a wanted man and came over to the UK and carried on with his musical career because there was no extradition treaty for them to deport him from the UK to Jamaica. So and then he came under a different name, so nobody actually knew where he physically was. When they did. First of all, they branded him a hitman from Jamaica. He was no longer just somebody that killed somebody in a fight. He was now branded a hitman, and then collectively Scotland Yard and the News of the World branded him the godfather of the Yardie underworld gangster movement. Now, known to us here in the UK, there was no such thing. Yardies was a terminology we used to refer to back home. We come from Yard. It was a statement that we would make. But the Scotland Yard and News of the World created this thing about the Rankin Dread being the godfather of the Yardies, that every young individual, black man from no matter what island he was from, started walking around with a Jamaican accent and watching the sheer terror in the face of white people when he used that particular accent. Now, what that spawned at the time was the promotion of black man to petty criminal to major gangster role. And all of a sudden we had an invasion of crack cocaine and heroin, which was not something that black people actually used to deal with back in those days. But the question I ask is this: show me the black man with the remote control gate, the mansion and the limousines outside with 20 or 30 bodyguards to protect him, and I'll show you a scapegoat. But what that did do is it turned white people against black people back at that time. And as a black man, there was absolutely no way you can go on the streets of London in particular. It escalated the sus law. It escalated the stop and search law. It gave police new legislation to treat black people in a very unfair, discriminatory and victimized way. But that propaganda was to set black people back so many years that it's beyond a joke. But is that not the same propaganda that's being used to drive fear into the hearts of many about Muslims in particular? Because let's just get it right, not all Muslims are terrorists, but yet that's what they're going to try and have us believe.
Absolutely.
This is not a fight against religion. This is a political war. It's a political war that's being fought on a political front, and we only have to go back to the first Gulf War to actually put together the pieces that we're now seeing together take place right here in Syria.
Well, wait, Kervin. Even to say that is insulting. That's like saying not all black people are stupid. That's just, how can you say not all Muslims are terrorists? That is an insult. Not all Jews are rich. I mean, that's an insult. Number one, most Muslims live in Indonesia. I don't know any Indonesian terrorists bombing America or Europe. The second most live in Pakistan, and the third most live in India. I don't see any Pakistani, Indian, or Indonesian terrorists coming to America or Europe. And that is where the most Muslims live in the world.
But that's what they're turning. That's the propaganda.
Exactly. And when they say, like in America, only Christians can come into America, The number one people, and this I'm very proud of, the number one ethnic group in America saying that is dead wrong are the Jews. Because we know today Muslims, tomorrow us. We know that. And so if you look in America right now, the number one people condemning Ted Cruz, Jeb Bush, and Donald Duckhead Trump are Jews. They cannot stand this concept. Only Christians can come to America. And so when people say Muslims are terrorists, Muslims are not welcome here, Muslims hate us because we're free, they're out of their mind. They know nothing. That when the Christian king Ferdinand and Queen Isabella did their pogrom and Inquisition and Holocaust of 1492 against the Jews did not find refuge in Europe. They found refuge in Istanbul, which was then Constantinople, a Muslim place, and all over North Africa, all the way over to Syria. That's where the Jews went. A few went to Venice, a few went to Holland, and 90%, if they could make it, went to Muslim countries and were protected and treated well. So the Christians are the ones who did the Crusades. The Christians are the ones who did the Inquisition, and the Christians are the ones who did the Holocaust. We don't need to hear any Christian condemning Muslims.
Can I just interject there? That short burst, that conversation, I mean, look at it. Just in that conversation, we're talking about black people, white people, Muslims, Christians, Jewish people. We're all human beings. And when we're talking there's so much division within our society as a whole.
Absolutely.
And we're talking about people like they're separate to us. We all bleed blood. You know, we all want to live a happy life. And we've been this is one of the reasons why, you know, for me, religion is a form of mind control, because all it does is it just causes division, and, you know, it just pits people off, pits different sectors of society against each other. And if you imagine you're a ruling elite that wants to sit in their high tower and beam off the masses, if we're all at each other's throats, like, you know, he's a Muslim, he's black, he's white, he's gay, he's straight, they're just rubbing their hands. You know, we need to put down these lines of division and realise that, you know, we are collectively, we're all one family, and we need to look at who the real problems are, and they're not quite often. Look, don't get me wrong, there's going to be like bad people in every sectors of society. There's going to be bad white people, there'll be bad black people, there'll be bad Jewish people, there'll be bad Christians, etc., etc. They may do bad things, but on the whole, you know, most people in this world, they just want to get on with life, lead a happy life. They don't want to be troubled. And we have all this chaos because we're so divided. We have so many different lines of division. Income bracket is another one that you mentioned earlier, David. You know, we need to be wise enough to think, well, hang on a minute, you know, these are all really brothers and sisters. Who are really causing all this chaos? Who is behind all these wars, really? And
Tony, I understand what you're saying, and I sympathize 100%. But although I have a degree in philosophy, I am very pragmatic, unfortunately for myself, I think, and others. But let me say this. The Republican Party in America, you wouldn't believe this. They are the ones today, they're just the conservative party, they are the ones who want to say no more census taking basis on race or religion. In other words, don't ask somebody if he's black, Hispanic, or white. And don't admit people to university based on black or white. They don't want any kind of racial test or religious test or age and gender, homosexual, non-homosexual test. And the reason is they know if you cannot consider a person's race, even though we've kept black people down in America for 300 years, and they need a help up because we've had our foot on their necks so long, we have to give them some bandages before they can run the race that we're running with all of our advantages. They know that if we don't give them a hand up based on their race or other disadvantages, they know they win. And that's why they don't want us to acknowledge black versus white or any other racial, religious, gender factors. Because if we don't, in law, understand the differences, we cannot repair the differences. And they want the status quo. And that is the conundrum and the dilemma in which we find ourselves. If you don't acknowledge that 80% of the people in prison are African Americans who make up 14% of the American population, you can't see that something is going wrong in terms of putting black people in prison and not putting white people in prison. When that is not acknowledged, the power elite win, and the people who struggle for freedom lose. Do you understand? Do you sense what I'm saying?
Yeah,
so I love what you're saying, that we're all humans, we all bleed. We've all read that beautiful soliloquy from Shylock and the Merchant of Venice. Do I not cry? Do I not bleed? We all know that. But the fact is, it is a reality. We must consider it, or we cannot repair the damage that has been done, is being done, and will be done.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm very pragmatic myself in many ways. I like to think that one day we might grow up and realise that actually, what are we doing? We're just hating on each other, and it doesn't benefit anyone. And it just.
Do you know, while you're talking there, David, I'll tell you what I love. I love the recent post of the parents or the relative family member of one of those Parisians that died on the attacks on Friday, and he said, "You will not get my hate." I love that particular post. He said, "You will not get my hate." It was
the husband of
That's
one
right.
of the.
He said, "You will not get my hate," and he had to do that because he's got a 17-month-old son belonging to the dead wife that he needs to be able to raise. That he does not want to be affected and poisoned by the hatred of those that have perpetuated that crime. But he said that you will not get my hate. Now, when we talk about hate, the propaganda is what causes people to hate on each other, right? Now, so
wait, Kervin, wait. Please forgive me. I'm so sorry. I need to address that as from the psychological point of view. Recently, we had a black church in Charleston. A white boy went in. He was welcomed. They prayed with him. Then he took out a couple guns, and he killed 9 people in that church from age, I think, 21 until age 87. Everyone was slaughtered like a wild beast, like snakes in a pit. And the people were pressured by their minister and others. Their minister was killed, but by other ministers in this historic black church of Charleston to say they forgive. And they went to the court on his bail hearing and said, "You can't get rid of my hurt, but we forgive you because we're Christian people." Many of those people who did that under peer group pressure and under the light of the television cameras have now taken those forgiveness statements back. And they feel very injured that they were pressured to say that for the media to calm down the city so that there wouldn't be a riot. And they didn't have time to grieve properly. So when a man who says his wife was the love of his life, the most important thing to him, he would give his own life for her, and she is the mother of his child, when he says he can forgive and they won't make him hate, within 48 hours of having everything he claims to have loved taken from him, that man is still in a moment of overwhelming grief. And we have to take that for what it is. Because of YouTube and because of television and because of mass media, he is saying things that the power elite want him to say. And I think he needs time to breathe.
But I also said it's a powerful statement.
Yes, it is, but it's also
it's a powerful statement.
It's very manipulative. That man didn't cry. He didn't weep. He didn't stutter. I lost my wife. My wife died. I couldn't talk about her for 7 years after she died. So I know everybody is different in life. But when you can forgive the murderer of your wife, the mother of your child, within 48 hours of her being cut down like a slaughtered pig, there's something else that I have to question about the humanity of a person who can forgive so easily, because even the Bible says, don't be too quick to forgive. Don't be too quick.
Do you know...
And by the way, we have a saying in Judaism, you cannot forgive for what somebody did to somebody else. You can only forgive what they did to you. He didn't kill this boy. He killed his wife.
Yeah.
It's up to her to forgive. So when people say, can you ever forgive the Germans for killing your family at Auschwitz? I always say, that's up to my family and God. That's up to my family who died and God. That's not up to me. I'm aware of what they did, and I'm going to do everything as long as I live to make sure such a radical fascism never rises from the dirt again.
But let me just re-emphasize something. He didn't actually say, as somebody else is just pointing out, he didn't actually say that he forgave. What he actually said was he wouldn't hate. Because hatred is a poisonous thing that eats you up. And he didn't want his son to be poisoned by his hatred while he was bringing up his son. And that is the essence of his statement. And I think we need to give credit for that, because that's something very difficult for any of us to have been able to contemplate doing if we were put in the same situation as him. But I applaud him for that statement, and it's not something that's against terrorism or against the government. Or this is something that he did for himself, to set himself free, that he was going to be able to carry on raising his 17-month-old son in the absence of his beloved wife.
Let me ask Tony a question. Tony, do you believe, based on your revelations that you claim you've received and knowledge you've acquired from this study...
I haven't received any revelations. Can I just make that clear?
Well, I'm sorry. At the very beginning you said some crimes had been revealed to you, and... I'm not using it as a religious sense. I'm using it in the sense of... What I meant was
I'd just done some research. I'd done a lot of research, and I was coming across answers.
Okay, let me ask you. Okay, I didn't mean it in the religious sense. I meant it in the sense of acquired knowledge. Now, based upon all that you know, can you conceive in your mind, and this is not to contradict you, Kervin, it's only to maintain a certain cynicism that I find necessary to deal with these power elite who would control our lives. Do you find it conceivable that the government officials, nurses, psychologists, news media, and all the agents who take orders from these order givers, do you find it conceivable that they could persuade people directly or indirectly to make statements like that young man made?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
okay, that's all I was trying to get at.
Yeah, I mean, if that was said, then there is a great amount of humility. So I get where Kervin's coming from,
yes,
and yes, there's way too much hate in the world. But also, I see your point of view, David, that if things are coming from the media so soon afterwards, we need to be I guess we need to show discernment as to how does that feel? Does that feel like it could be true? And then we go on and do some more research. But I think ultimately the best justice, that if whoever was killed or whatever happened on that day, we need to do. Not only the people in Paris, if there was anyone killed there, but the people now that are being bombed in Syria by the day. It's 143 people apparently died in Paris. 143 people a day for the last 3 years have been dying in Syria. The best thing that we can do, if we're coming from a place of love and care, is get to the bottom of what is going on, why it's going on, what the agenda is, why they want so much war, and then exposing it. And we need the alternative media, and shows like Kervin's here, is so important now. And as alternative media, we need to go toe to toe in a boxing ring with the mainstream media, because mark my words, they will be looking to clamp down on our freedoms on social network as people are starting to talk more, as people are starting to do more shows to get out, and truth and real information is getting out there beyond the mainstream. There is then going to be a lockdown, and this is the other reason why this so-called terrorist attack happened. Firstly, they wanted to get into Syria, but secondly, they are hell-bent on taking away more of our rights and freedoms by the day. And the best excuse they can do is, if they want to take certain things away from the internet, which they're already talking about, is that they'll use the guise of terrorism to do that. So they've got us locked down, or they want to get us locked down more and more CCTV staring at us in the face, and people actually think that we're free. So we need to like realize that instead of like talking about the lines of division, we need to look at who the real enemy is and expose that for what it is. And that's the only way that we're going to get out of it, is if we stop looking and pointing the finger at each other, and saying, right, I'm not going to buy into that ideology of Islamic extremism or whatever. I'm going to look at it. I'm going to use my own mind. I'm not going to think what the news tell me. I'm not going to think what the papers are telling me to believe. I need to gather information from different information streams that aren't coming from mainstream, and then I'm going to make a decision. And I guarantee if people do that, they'll find there's a lot more than meets the eye. And in fact, at the core of it, there is this ruling so-called elitists. I don't like to refer to them as that, and they are pulling the strings, manipulating society in the direction they want. And we need to be more focused on that rather than the lines of division that they set out, and they propagate even more. I mean, over here, the whole, you mentioned earlier, Kervin, about the guy, the black guy earlier. Well, this is happening with the Muslims. They are being absolutely demonized from left, right, and centre, and people are buying into it. And we need to, if we're aware of certain information, we need to be wise. Well, I'm not going to go into that, and we need to shine the light on what that is, and that is propaganda.
And that's the bottom line. You see, what's been meted out there, what's been put out there is hatred, pure hatred through propaganda. And it's going to take, we've had this conversation on several times. If something's happening in your company, in your environment, in your presence, and you don't challenge it, knowing that it's wrong, you're saying that what these people are doing are okay. And if I know that there are peoples, races of peoples, ethnicities or whatever that are being wrongly treated, and I pass by without saying that that's wrong, then I'm in agreement in those that are persecuting them. So I know that not every Muslim is a terrorist, because I have Muslim friends. No, I'm not a Muslim, but I have Muslim friends. I sit down in the sauna with Muslim individuals. I work with some Muslims. And this is not your standardized, I've got a black friend routine. You know what I mean? Because there are many black people. In fact, there are members of my family who are Muslim. So I know that, my cousins are not sitting down planning another attack. Far from it. I grew up in the East End of London, where we've got a tremendous amount of mosques, but I've not seen any one of them go out there who lived on the street where I grew up in. But the bottom line is, this propaganda is being spread out. It's being spread out, especially through countries that are taking refugees, and they're being forced to believe that these people that are coming in through religious beliefs, and that's the problem, through religious beliefs, are waging war on them, terror on them. And so
it's not only religious, Kervin. It's very political, and it's financial, it's economical, it's hatred, it's an attempt to gain an advantage in a political situation between Palestine and Israel. As long as the West and America are seen as fighting Muslims, we have less sympathy for the Palestinian cause, and that helps the Zionists. And don't ever doubt that all this is happening following the Iran deal. And don't ever doubt for a second that the hatred projected onto the Muslims by the power elite and Zionists in America and Europe have a great deal to do with our treatment of the Muslims and to the benefit of Israel. And don't ever doubt that.
Oh yeah, of course, absolutely, yeah,
absolutely. So here we are now. We've had this massive, and we really want to bring it back to what's going on in Syria and Paris in particular, because that really has sort of lit the touch paper again, especially this week. Yes, we're fully, and I'm not going to try and minimize or trivialize what's taking place in Kenya and Nigeria, but I'm hopefully that we're going to be able to touch on that before the show finishes. But this thing in Syria, right? The fact that you've got the Russians on one side who've already got troops in there. You've got America who wants to put troops in there. You've got France who are now bombing it consistently since the beginning of last week, based on the terror attacks that they said. Don't forget, on Monday Holland came out and said, "We are at war." His words, "We are at war." Right? And now you've got Cameron, who was saying, well, I don't think that we're going to have any heightened terrorist attacks here if we decide to send ground troops into Syria. So there is already a hint, right, of a European get-together, right, in order, right, to get what is this issue in Syria that is so significant that's got everybody fighting for that soil? That's the question I'm asking tonight. What is so significant about Syria? Because, Tony, you hit the points earlier on. You said that they've been trying to wage war in Syria for years. This is nothing new. We know that. When they started the war with Iraq, they were talking about going into Syria. You know what I mean? It never took place. And there was always something stopping them from going in there. Jordan might retaliate, or so-and-so might object. And they were always trying to stop hurting somebody's feelings or the other. But what is the significant event that has now got all of these countries scrambling to bomb out? And if you've seen what Syria had been leveled to the ground already, and what all of these refugees are already fleeing from, right? There's nothing left to bomb out there, I would imagine, right? What is so significant?
Tony, wait 1 second. Kervin, God, you're really hot today. I love it. Tony, can I ask you to let me answer this part first, and then I'd like you to respond?
Yeah, go for it.
Kervin, is that all right with you?
Absolutely.
Now, I have a view, and I need about a minute and a half to say this.
You got it.
And I'll say it as succinctly as possible, since it's not written down, and it's going to have to flow from this limited brain of mine. I have a view. The state of Israel cannot exist without water. They can import oil and energy. They can make atomic weaponry. They have all the weapons they ever need. But Israel cannot exist without water. Currently, in Israel, people are limited to the amount of water they can use. The Jews can have about a 2-minute shower. In America, people take 30-minute showers. 2-minute shower, all right? The Palestinians have maybe 20 liters of water a day among them, even though it's their water. Where does the water in Israel come from? It's not groundwater. They have no aquifers. It comes primarily from the 3 rivers that originate in the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights are Syria. They were given to Syria after World War I as a mandate that France ruled. When Syria gained its independence, Syria acquired the Golan Heights, and it snows there, by the way. And that becomes the Jordan River and 2 other rivers, which fill up the Kinneret Sea. In Israel, it's called Kinneret. We call it the Sea of Galilee. That sea furnishes the water through tributaries for the entire Nazareth agricultural production area of northern Israel. That is where 70% of Israel's crops come from, their cattle, all of that comes from that area. Without that water, there's no irrigation, there's no potable water, that's water one can drink and bathe in, and there is a limit on the growth of Israel itself. The Jordan River and water, the Sea of Galilee, which partially belonged to Syria and Jordan before the 67 war, are essential. In other words, that is as important to Israel's survival as the Navy was to England's survival for 300 years. Now, having said that, in 67, Israel sent spies into Syria. They also acquired the Golan Heights. In 1980, I believe 1 or 2, Israel, in violation of international law, annexed and made a part of Israel the Golan Heights. a complete violation of the law. The UN has never recognized, and nor has the United States, Israel's most important ally and supporter. Now, Israel sent Mossad to London. They co-opted Assad's son, Hafez Assad's son, who was an optometry student in London. They put him in power after his father died. And the deal is, with Israel, we will keep you in power so long as you never make a claim on the Golan Heights, our demand that we return it. And in time, the official policy of Israel is to de facto make it such a part of Israel that it can never, ever be returned. Because if it were returned, Syria's army, if it had the Golan Heights, would be within 60 miles, roughly 100 kilometers, of Haifa, one of the most important cities in the entire Middle East and the wealth center beside Tel Aviv in Israel. Now, having said all that, this is the reason why you never, ever hear of Israel speaking out against Assad or the radicals who he supports, nor the Iranians in Syria, because they keep Iran and Syria are keeping Assad in order, and Israel is running him as a Mossad agent. He is only a member of 10%, the Alawites of Syria. Syria has Sunni, Shiite, and Alawite, and some Christian. His tribe is only 10%. They have him as an agent, and they protect him. And when he was about to fall, with America and France going after him after using chemical gas in violation of the law and crossing Obama's red line, the very moment that almost happened, Benjamin Netanyahu, who has 1 million former Soviet citizens in his country, 1 million Russians live in Israel, flew to Putin and got Putin to send in the aircraft carriers and prevent the attack upon Assad. And recently, Israel, right after the Iran deal, flew to Moscow the day after it was signed, and he and Putin made a deal, and the next day, Putin sent his army and air forces into Syria to protect Assad. All of these facts are not conspiracy, they're not conjecture, they are not speculation. They are absolute facts. And if you can show me one item in any Israeli, American, or European newspaper where Netanyahu has ever called Syria's President Assad any name or demanded his removal or called him an anti-Semite, I will give you $100. Now, go ahead, Tony. That's my view of what's happening in Syria.
Yeah, that was quite a detailed view and very, very informative, that one. I mean, I was just going to say that there's several other reasons that perhaps why it's so important for them to get hold of Syria. As far as I'm aware, it doesn't have a Rothschild's bank. Is the first reason, which obviously they control most of the monetary system. It has no debt either. It has no debt to the International Monetary Fund. I don't think Syria is a support agent of the apartheid aspect, and it's the last secular Arab nation in the world. You know, there are a few reasons that I can come up with, but ultimately the biggest reason is that they seem to want to manipulate this Third World War, which they're hell bent on doing.
Wow. Well, here's something else to throw into the mix. Could what Syria borders harbour an idea into why Syria would also be strategically good to control?
Sorry, say that again, Kervin.
The borders of Syria, what Syria actually borders, and the countries that it borders, and what would be allowed to pass through Syria. Could that not also be a reason why Syria would be a good strategic place to take control of?
Yeah. I think there's multiple reasons why they're going for Syria. I don't think there's one specific reason. Certainly, certainly that could be a major reason. Logistically, for getting things in and out of that region.
I mean, after all,
it's rich in resources. We know that.
And during the first couple of Gulf Wars, the Syrian borders were used by all of the enemies to get things backwards and forwards without any consequence.
Yeah. And of course, it's rich in resources again with the oil and gas supply. So it could be that as well. I don't think there's one particular reason. I think
Syria. Let me say this. Geographically, the importance of Syria is overwhelming. Not so much because of its land access, because it's underneath Turkey, and if Turkey and NATO wanted to take over Syria, they could do it by land within about 48 hours by sending in 1 million Turkish troops, which would be very easy. The Turks are a great army. They have NATO equipment and NATO intelligence. So if we wanted to take them by land, it's no problem. And as far as their access to Jordan and Israel, they don't have an army to do anything. And Iraq, you got to cross 300 miles of desert before you get to the first town with 3 sheep in it. So it doesn't really matter. What matters is Syria has a huge coastline between Turkey and Lebanon and Israel. And Israel completely dominates Lebanon, completely dominates Egypt with their LCC on the power now after overthrowing the Muslim Brotherhood with Mossad's help. And so Syria and its connection to Russia give the only sea-based threat to Israel. And that is why Israel has just bought and been given, in part, half was given, half was bought, 5 nuclear submarines from the German military establishment. They have 5 nuclear submarines, and that is to block off the Syrian coast sea lanes in the event a major Mediterranean conniption fit happened because Israel dropped an atom bomb or something and Russia came in to take revenge. So the import strategically, militarily for Syria is its coastline on the Mediterranean, not its land borders, except for that part relating to water flowing into its.
Okay, well, that makes sense. But whatever it is, the point I'm trying to make is this, right? Surely this war that they're waging on Syria is far greater than just going after ISIS. Because let's just get it right, with all the weaponry and technology that they've got, if they really wanted to, they could take out ISIS in a couple of swift moves. Right?
I think we need to be asking the question as to why our governments are funding ISIS and training their people that join that group, using their supplying them with cars and weapons. I think we need to be asking that question rather than how they can get to ISIS, who's creating ISIS, and who's letting ISIS do all this stuff that they're doing.
Well, Tony, let me jump in here 1 second. One of the reasons that the Americans created ISIS in the first place is they realized, leaving Baghdad, that the Shiites had taken over. And they put the Shiites in charge. But they didn't know the Shiite government of Baghdad would get into bed and fornicate to make little devils with Iran so quickly. That panicked Israel. And as a compromise with Israel, America and the Israeli secret services produced ISIS. And ISIS was the Sunni answer to a Shiite government in Baghdad. In other words, if you get too far out of control in Baghdad, we're going to sick the Sunni on you, and the Sunni come in the name of ISIS. Now, what happened is, when ISIS decided to move on Baghdad, contrary to the orders of Washington and Israel, the Iranians were allowed to come in with 40,000 soldiers and 15 generals and whip the dickens out of the ISIS. And they moved back up north. They were within 15 miles of Baghdad. They moved back up north and towards Syria and retreated. And they felt betrayed by Israel and America, and therefore they began to move into Syria and the oil lands and to make money. They said, if we can't have Baghdad and the southern oil fields from the Shiites, we will have our own, and we will build our own caliphate. And that's how it began, and that's how it's operating, and we are killing our own Frankenstein, but he is our Frankenstein.
So who's still funding? Are Americans still funding ISIS?
Not now, because the ISIS turned against the American initial purpose for it. And now Americans want to stop them because they've taken over these oil fields in northern Iraq, and that's affecting our relationship, a newborn relationship with Iran. And Iran is the natural power between Pakistan and Israel. The natural power is the Persian Empire for 4,000 years. And you can't keep that down.
Yeah, go on, Tony.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we are still funding them. I think that having ISIS in that region is a perfect excuse to go and bomb innocent people and steal their resources. So I think that, you know, they're well aware of what they're doing with ISIS. The ruling Zionists, I think they know exactly what's going on with them, and I think that they are very well suited being there, and they like them being there because it gives them the excuse they need to manipulate this world war that we're on the cusp of.
Tony, when you say that we fund, who is funding ISIS and guiding them? I mean, when you say we, I mean
Western governments.
Collectively.
Yeah. I mean,
by purchasing their oil.
Hillary Clinton has admitted that Al Qaeda was created by the West, funded by the West. The Mujahideen was. It's all, you know, all these terrorist organisations somewhere down the line are funded by Western governments, and you know, it's the elephant in the room. No one's asking the question why, and you know, this is causing havoc in the region, and many, as you say, up to 1 million people since 9/11, probably more, that we don't know about, that aren't on official records, have been maimed in the name of this war on terror, which is never going to end, because there's always a boogeyman, and there's always a reason to go and do this to these countries.
The way forward has got to be where we can find a way to change the minds of the people that are being influenced by this propaganda, that it can no longer be supported. How do we go about changing the minds of people who don't forget, your president or prime minister will get up there and make a statement, and people will buy it. They'll subscribe to it. They'll fall for it. How do we change the minds of the people?
Well, I think we're living in times now where the belief in heads of state and politicians is at an all-time low. That, you know, it's very clear that we don't have choice when it comes to political parties. That's why nothing ever changes, whoever you vote for. You know, we're given a bit of paper and a cross to put in a box every 4 years, and that's our freedom. That's our illusion of choice given to us. You know, fact is, if you look at the UK, you've got David Cameron, it's the fourth cousin to the Queen. You know, that there's the chances of someone like me becoming Prime Minister in this country are like slim to zero. You know, they're all trained in Eton. You know, Eton is the training ground for Prime Ministers here. Yeah. Prime Ministers are selected, they're not elected. And we need to wake up to the fact that there are people behind the politicians that are pulling the strings, and the politicians are just put there in front of us to give us the illusion of choice. We don't have any choice. That's why nothing ever changes. And they keep coming out over and over again saying that we're free, we have freedom. You know, there's change. That's why, you know, you'll know, David, that in psychology, if you repeat something enough, it embeds itself into the psyche. And Obama's whole political campaign was based on change, and we can do it. And
yes, we can.
Yes, we can. And that's repeated over and over and over again. So that filters through to the subconscious mind of the masses. So they start to believe it. And we need to realise that we're actually being hypnotised by these leaders into thinking that we have choice and change, and we don't.
Well, listen, in a modern democratic society where governments are elected, leaders are elected. We briefly discussed this before we went on air, Tony, and I think it's about time to bring it in. Surely a leader of any nation should not have the right to lead its country into war without the permission and the support of the very people that elected them into power in the first place.
Well, this is the thing, Kervin. I mean, if we look at the last Iraq war, where Tony Blair or Tony Blair said that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and the streets were lined, and millions of people, well, I don't know if it's millions, but certainly thousands of people said no, they still went ahead and done it. So they're not representing the people at all. And it wouldn't have mattered if it was the Conservative, the Green Party, or the Labour Party. The people pulling the strings behind those politicians, they wanted to go into Iraq. The Zionists at the helm, they wanted to go into Iraq, and that's what happened. The public don't have support. This whole setup of politics is there just to keep the masses as some kind of outlet of frustration, that people can look to politics if there's to vent their frustrations, when actually nothing changes through that. We the people need to start decentralizing, realizing what it is that they're doing, and pulling back from it, and becoming our own leaders. You know, we need to become our own leaders and stop looking at these people in black suits that all they want to do is cause war, division, and we need to pull away from these people and stop buying into it, because it doesn't serve us. It's never served us. You know, they're manipulating from us and thinking that we have choice, and we don't.
And that has to be the questions that we start asking at elections. When
Kervin, let me say something happening in America right now in reference to your statement about the consent of the people before we go to war, and Tony Blair and George Bush and those other criminals. We have this little thing called a United States Constitution. And Republicans love to go around and carry a copy of it in their breast pocket. And they hold it up at their rallies and say, the Constitution, the Constitution. Most of them can't even wear it, read it. And secondly, if they did read it, they'd be ashamed, because it says it's perfectly okay to own slaves. They count as 3/5 as a person for voting purposes. They can't vote. And you can import them free from the world until 1808. And then from 1808 on, you have to pay $10 a head when you bring in an African. So that's the Constitution they love. Women can't vote, poor people can't vote, you have voting poll tests, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a little thing in there. I hear a squeaky chair.
Sorry. I did oil it. I did oil it earlier on.
I'm going to send you a new chair from IKEA. Now,
times are hard, Kervin, right?
Very hard.
You need to sit on the floor. Now, there's a thing called, if I recall, Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 11 of the United States Constitution. And it says, Congress shall declare war and issue marks of reprieve. That means only Congress can declare war, not the president. Once Congress declares war or authorizes war, the president conducts the war. He's the commander-in-chief. Now, there is a bill before Congress submitted by Democrats and the president demanding that the Congress approve any further military actions in the Middle East and Syria. The Republicans who run the House and run the Senate will not allow that to be brought up as a vote, because they are in a dilemma. If they vote to approve Obama's war, they're in it with him. And number two, if they give a black man the power over our military officially, then they will be voted out of office for giving that N-word African, Muslim, our army. So the Republicans' hatred and cowardice forbid us from fulfilling the demand of the United States Constitution. And that is something we cannot ignore, and we must hold them accountable.
Well, let's take it this way then. Let's take it. Let's rewind it a little bit, right? When Tony Blair was in power, and I'm glad you mentioned him, Tony. When Tony Blair was in power, and he led us to war in the Gulf War on the back of this weapons of mass destruction. I don't know if you remember this correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a big hoo-ha after it, and he had to go into these meetings, and he denied over and over and over again, right, that there was any false information, and that they went into war based on the information that there was weapons of mass destruction, right? Never once did he give an indication that it might have been false information or wrong information. He made out for the entire time while he was in power, and just after he stepped down as Prime Minister, he maintained his position that there was always the threat of weapons of mass destruction, which is why we went to war. Now, just recently, last month, I think it was last month or the month before, he has now come out on record saying that we went to war on false information. That means this is not something that he's been given privy to today. It means that he would have always been aware that they went to war on wrong information. Should he not have to face war crimes for his role in a war that shouldn't have been? Tony.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's actually a reward out for a citizen's arrest on Tony Blair. And actually a few members of the public have actually, I forget what the website is, but a few members of the public have actually tried to attempt a citizen's arrest on him, which is quite amusing. But obviously his minion order followers, protect him, so that puts a stop to that. But yeah, I mean, the guy is responsible, along with Bush, for God knows how many lives in that region based on lies. Yeah, and this is going on all the time. We go to war based on propaganda and in the main lies. And we need to stop. We need to turn off the television and close the newspapers and start thinking for ourselves. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, he absolutely needs to be brought to task over this.
I'm not sure if you're aware of this, gentlemen, but this week a judge in Spain issued a European-wide arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu. If he steps foot anywhere in the EU, according to the laws of Europe, he should be arrested on that Spanish warrant. Now, we don't know if any other country will abide by that, but we do know that the government of Israel has taken seriously enough to protest vigorously to the Spanish government and the king, Philip, and Netanyahu called Obama immediately and asked him to withhold all further cooperation with Spain until they lift it. I don't think Obama's in the mood to do that for Netanyahu. But anyway, if he lands in England, there is I signed it also, 100,000 person petition demanding his arrest also. Now, as far as Tony Blair goes, he's Bush's poodle. He knew exactly what was going on, and he should be held criminally responsible, as should Bush and Cheney, not only for the war, but for the crimes committed during the war, including torture in violation of the Geneva Convention, International Treaty, United Nations, and our own laws.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I saw that petition. If only he would be arrested. But of course, the people that run the police and the head of, they're part of the game as well. They're not gonna go ahead and do that on a few, on people's signatures, unfortunately. But the intent was there. I mean, the intent was good, but yeah, these people, horrific what they've done. They need to be brought to task for sure.
We need to start petitioning our politicians, our governments, and people who are looking to get into position. We need to
But
start.
Kervin, just on that, sorry, petitions. I understand people. They're coming from the right place, but petitions, they don't work. They don't work. They've never really changed anything substantially. In my eyes, petitioning is a form of begging. The best way that we can deal with these people is to start drawing back and not playing their games, and little things, non-compliance. Basically, we need to. There's all these unjust laws and licenses that we need. As long as we're not causing any harm or loss to another human being, which is the real natural law, not the constitutional natural law. That's the law that you're born into this world as sovereign being, and the only law that you have to abide by is not to cause harm or loss to another human being. As long as we are abiding by that, we're not breaking any laws. All these other man-made laws are there to enslave us and to control us. And we need to step back and say no and stop paying these TV licenses. For example, the BBC, which is basically covering up paedophiles. We need to stop paying these licenses. These laws that are there just to control us, and we need to start stepping away from it and just saying no to them rather than begging and signing these online petitions which do absolutely nothing, which I'm sure when they're sitting in their offices and at their banquet halls in these rich parties they're just sitting there laughing at the fact that we're sending in petitions to beg them to stop doing something. It needs to become more not aggressive in a hateful way. We need to become more strong in what we're doing. Because
Absolutely.
Tony, I would like to add to that, because I listened very carefully to one of your speeches, and by the way, I was very happy to listen to them. I learned a lot this morning, drinking my coffee, looking at my ocean. But one thing you talk about is a reset. You think that we have to have a reset. Well, that kind of rubs badly on American ears, because we think of the reset button with Russia that Hillary Clinton talked about. But you're talking about a reset as a means to readjust a society in which a few have taken over the rights of the many. And I am a historian. I am an historian. That's what I am, a PhD in history, medieval history. And I don't say that to pull rank or to claim to know more than anyone else, merely to say that I have studied extensively the history of humanity. And the only significant, and I say this in response to your petition comment, because I agree with it 1,000,000,000%, the only reset that has ever counted in the history of the world is blood. You've got to have the Vandals invade Rome, Egypt invade Palestine, Rome invade Egypt, Persia invade Babylonia. You've got to have the French Revolution, the American Revolution, the Russian Revolution. You've got to have blood. You even had a terrible bloody war from 1648 until 1658. You had Cromwell ruling. To put Cromwell on power, you had to cut off the head of your king and a lot of his followers. You had the Protestant revolt under Henry VIII in England to marry Anne Boleyn, and God knows what Queen Mary did, and then later Elizabeth and Henry himself, and Cromwell, his minister. So blood is the resetting factor. It reset Hitler, it reset Japan, it reset all those countries. It's war, war, and blood, blood. How, in your mind, knowing this is the only real reset in history that ever has a significant change on human structure, can you achieve this without blood?
Well, I think it can be done. I think we're at a point now where we are hopefully evolving or trying to evolve, and I do feel like it can be done without doing that, but it's going to take people to step outside their comfort zone.
Absolutely.
And a good example of non-violent work, something non-violent work in Kervin, you'll probably remember this, was the poll tax when Thatcher was going to introduce the poll tax, and people stood up in numbers and said, no, we're not having it, and I feel that it can be done like that.
In fact, people were refusing to pay it.
Well, this is it, and it's a simple refusal. It's if everyone woke up tomorrow and said that, I'm not going to pay my TV license, or I'm not going to pay my council tax, how on earth are they going to enforce any of that? I'm not going to pay these ridiculous parking fines for parking over 1 foot over a yellow line or something, or being a minute late back to your car. These laws are completely immoral. They're completely out of line with natural law. And if we all started non-compliance, not saying no, not just bowing down to everything that they say, and actually taking a real stand and not going along with it, then we have the numbers to do that, because they're the tiny few and we're the many. But it takes people to turn the TV off, get away from the X Factor, start caring about what's going on, and getting active.
Absolutely. Now we're running out of time, and I just want to get into a couple of points before we do. So I'm going to throw this one at you again, Tony. I want to summarise on the terrorism and refugee status, right? And what I'm trying to get here is how much of this propaganda is aimed at turning the tide on the flood of refugees, and why?
How much of it is aimed at the refugees?
Well, because the bottom line to me is this propaganda that has now created war in France will obviously turn the tide of people opening their barriers and letting the refugees in.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So how much of that do you actually believe is directed at putting a stop to the flow of refugees coming into Europe in particular, and why?
My own opinion on that is, I think they want this flood of immigrants coming into all the countries, because the long-term plan, if you study what they're looking to do, they're looking to dissipate the idea of nations, whereby people lose that connection to their own sort of their own country and their own nation. So by flooding Europe with different factions of different with the refugees, people are becoming more and more dissipated from their culture, and also what that is doing is it's causing more divide and rule. So it's causing people are getting frustrated that people are coming into their country, even though it's like an imaginary border created by man. They're getting frustrated with they're looking at their fellow human that's just coming in to try and better themselves from a war-torn country. They're blaming each other, so you've got more divide, more hatred going on within nations, and then all the time that's going on, the powers that shouldn't be are creating more wars, bombing more innocent people, getting away with their paedophilia, which a lot of them at the top are into. They're getting away with all that while we're pointing the finger at each other, and that's why it's a good thing for them to have the refugee crisis going on, because people are just the average guy in England, the average Sun reader or Mail reader, is absolutely filled with hate at the moment towards the refugees and towards Muslims, and that's the controllers' dream, because while we're doing that, they can get away with doing whatever they want.
Absolutely. Your thoughts, David?
I agree that I think the mass migration is an attempt, and successful so far, to destabilize European countries largely, and to create hatred where there should be no hatred, and to allow for a war to continue to exist without having the bodies. In other words, the bodies are now our problem, so to speak, in their view, and but they'd rather have them as migrants instead of lying dead all over the streets like they were in Baghdad. So it's a public relations spiel also. I think that if we are serious, and this may be the last comment I make today because of the time, but I need to say this. If we have learned anything in America, anything, a country with more lawyers than England has sheep, that it is going to be this. I should say New Zealand has sheep. I should say this. Lawyers suing people who do bad things, pollute waters, cut down forests, produce asbestos, produce lead in food. Lawyers who sue bad doctors, bad engineers, bridges that don't work, they get huge sums of money from an irate jury, and they pay until they go bankrupt in many cases. Money talks. When you take money out of the pockets of the 1%, it talks. Yeah. And if we are ever to have peace on earth, it will only be, for example, let me make this very clear.
You're going to have to run it very quickly.
If you go into a bar in America and you get drunk and the bartender lets you drive home, he gets sued. If you smoke tobacco and you get cancer, the cancer company, tobacco makers have paid billions in damages for this cancer. And until we make the arm producers, Halliburton, Lockheed, General Electric, General Motors, until we make all these generals, and they are generals of corporations, until we make them people who produce weapons in England, France, America, Russia, Israel's the 7th biggest, America's the 1st, until we make them pay in court by surrendering their stocks and dividends and wealth for the damage they bring upon the world, there will never be an end to war. But when we can nail them in the court and make them pay, that'll be the end of it.
Last comment from Tony before I go. We've got to go. We're running out of time.
Yeah, just quickly, I just want to say to people and all the listeners, don't buy into the propaganda. Don't buy into the lines of division of black, white, Muslim, Judaism. We are all one. We are all one human family. We need to be looking at the real cause of this problem, which is the Western governments, and realise that they are manipulating these events, and we need to come together against the small amount of people that are doing this, because we are 7 billion people on this planet. We are far, far, far more bigger than the people that are doing this to us and causing this friction and division, and we need to realise that and come together and realise who the real enemy is, because it's not who we think it is.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, I want to thank you once again for an absolutely enthralling show, and thank you very much for joining us, Tony and
Thanks,
David.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you,
Thanks,
Kervin.
David.
And listen, we look forward to catching up with you again, David. I look forward to catching up with you again next week. But this is it from Issues Today. We're out of here. Thank you very much.
Bye.
World Jam Global Radio. This is clarity. This is clarity.
Just want to thank everybody for joining us on a fantastic show. I, Sean, coming up from New York right after this.
We all gonna sing the same song. We all gonna sing the same song. We all gonna sing the same song. Oh, whether you're a bubble, or whether you're an Orthodox, or whether you're a Binginati J, or whether you're a 12th tribe of Israel, we all gonna sing the same song. We all gonna jam the same jam.
My gosh!
We all gonna chop the same chop.
I'll be back next week, next Saturday night, with another great,
so if you all get
enthralling, informative, educational show on Issues Today. Want to thank the team once again. Tony Sayer, special guest, my sidekick Dr. David Ramey, and most importantly, producer Linda Sue.
all gonna sing the same song.
Want to thank all the support team as well. Ninjet, you big.
All gonna jam the same.
Large in the areas, we would say.
We all gonna chop the same chow. Take us out of our homeland. Take us down here in Babylon. You wanted us to sing you that same song. You wanted us to sing you that same song. You wanted us to sing you that same song. And I know all gonna sing the same song. We all gonna jam the same jam. Are you ready? Are you ready?
World Jam Global Radio, this is clarity.
Are you ready? Are you ready?